Well, I mean, you said, why did your readers have to wait? And I want to know, why did I have to wait? It was very frustrating. The reality is that it probably only took me about 2 years to write this book, but it took me 7 years or 8 years to begin the book because I just didn't really care about anything enough. Or I thought I cared about something and I worked on it for a while and then it petered out. Um, I find writing to be a very exhausting experience. I have friends who are writers, and for them, each book is like, yeah, I'm writing another book, and it's an experiment or a project or a chance to write something about a rock and roll band or about the Vietnam War, and somehow like the accumulation of all of those projects will create the self as a writer. And I'm just not like that. I wish I were like that sometimes, but for me, I always have this little voice that's saying to me, this will be the last thing you ever write. And I don't mean that I'm going to die, and I don't mean that I won't write another book, but in the most straightforward way, the next book I write will be written by somebody else. Mm-hmm. And it really will. Like when I look back at everything is illuminated, obviously I know I wrote it, but I don't really feel like I wrote it. It just feels like a completely different life and a different self. And the same is with my second book as well. So it feels important to try to just exhaust myself, to really put everything that I have into it. And that takes a while to recover from when you're finished, and it takes a while also to regenerate. Maybe an analogy might be to somebody who's like married for a very long time, 20 years, 30 years, and then their spouse dies. And then, it might take them 5 years or 10 years to feel ready, to want to get involved with somebody else. And then it's not the case that as soon as you're ready it happens. You have to find the person has to come. Mm-hmm. And it took me a while to want to write again. I just felt no instinct to. Just like I feel very little instinct to right now. And it took me a good long time for that material to find me, where it really felt like it would be worth it. Not just a little experiment, but something that was substantial. Maybe. Yeah. I really tried to avoid that, to be honest.
Of course.
Like, Here I Am was, it was an obvious title once I had finished the book. And it was the right title, but I was nervous about it because I didn't want it to seem like, here I am, But there must be some truth to that also. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously both of those had some influence. How could I pretend that they didn't? But when I answer it honestly, it doesn't feel like those were all that important. I think the book is, it's about characters and certain situations, but to me it's more about themes, and the characters and the situations are useful to articulate the themes. And I think one of the big themes of the book is home, just as an idea, like a homeland as a home, a house as a home, a familial unit or a romantic relationship as a home, one's body as a home, one's job as a home. And that's something that I was thinking a lot about. This book is not in any way about my divorce. But I was thinking quite a bit about home in my own personal life during that time. Not just because I went through a divorce, but because I was approaching 40, because my body was changing, because my ideas about how I wanted to spend my time were changing. And I think the book, projects those concerns onto other people and other situations who are sometimes similar to me, sometimes not like me at all, but the concerns really were mine. Mm-hmm. Completely. first of all, how we have multiple identities, and how they sometimes complement each other, and how they sometimes conflict. You know, like I have the identity of being a writer, and I also have the identity of being a father. My kids wish I were home in New York right now. I wish I were home in New York right now. But this is my job, and it's also something I'm very proud of. It makes me happy to talk about my book and to hear people's responses. So, you know, I take a little bit from my identity as a parent, and I bring it to my identity as a writer. Olivier would have been happy if I'd stayed another day or two, but I took a little bit from my identity as a writer so that I could get back in time as a father. And it's fine. It's just borrowing and compromising and negotiating. But sometimes something happens that requires an ultimate, where you can't just say, I'll take a little from here and a little from there, but you have to say, you know, with parents and writing, an example might be, I can't imagine this ever happening in my life, but let's say I wrote a book and one of my children said, I don't want you to publish that. You know, it's too personal, don't do it. Well, then I would have to choose one identity over the other, and that would be very painful. It really would, especially if I believed that I was a good and loving father, and I believed that it was a good book written for the good reasons, not for bad reasons. So this book, Here I Am, has these two crises that force characters, or force Jacob in particular, to choose. You know, to say, I can't be a little bit inside my marriage, a little bit outside my marriage. I have to either be in or out. And vis-a-vis Israel, you know, he talks a good game about, you know, it being a special place that he feels a closeness to and a devotion to. But the crisis of the war and the prime minister asking all the Jews to come fight forces him to, in America we say, put your money where your mouth is, you know. Yeah, and with American Jews and Israelis, it's so interesting because it's not as if they've been separated by thousands of years. You know, it's one generation or two generations for the most part, and yet they seem so different, and they're in a way created in different molds. You know, Israelis, when Israel, the state, was founded, they not only wanted to create a country, but create a new form of Jew who was of the earth and muscular and not scholarly and not neurotic and had guns. And in America, that's just not the model of American Jewry. It's much more bookish and thinking and of the mind rather than the body. And so those are just generalizations. Obviously, not every Israeli is like that, and not every American Jew is like that. But I liked in the book bringing those generalizations together into one place. It's funny, and there's something poignant about it as well. You know, it's also a kind of a strained marriage, you could say. I don't know if it's a subject inside the book. I mean, to some extent it is. It is with Jacob's writing and, you know, like the chapter on the Bible and the ways in which characters kind of perform their lives rather than live their lives. And it's also, you know, a way I might describe my relationship to the book. That it's not autobiographical, but it is me in a lot of ways. It's the first book that I've written in the third person. You know, my first two books have these very strong first-person narrators, and I felt really liberated. There's a kind of irony in that when you're not writing in somebody's voice, you can write in your own voice, you know. It's also the first book I've ever written where people I know said to me, oh, it sounds like you. Nobody said to me, oh, you're just like Jacob. Nobody said that. But a lot of people said it sounds like you. And I was grateful to have that. It was just a different kind of relationship to writing for me. I think there's also an element in which, or a sense in which, the characters, they tell stories about themselves. Like, this is what our marriage is like. This is what our children are like. And they can kind of sustain the life through the story until they have to confront that actually there's a big difference between the story we've been telling and the life that we live. They keep a lot of secrets from each other or from themselves or from the world. They don't talk about their inability to have a healthy sex life, or there's a lot of private kind of shame that is the price that they pay for maintaining these stories, appearances. And again, these it's like they almost could have done it, except that certain things happen that force the recognition. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think crises, define us as people. And nobody wants a crisis. But there's always some sense in which we can be grateful that they happened, if just because they force us to confront who we are. It can be tragic, and also the confrontation with who we are can feel tragic, to find that we're not at all who we thought we were. We're not as brave, we're not as good, we're not as loving. But it can also be a relief. It was just Yom Kippur, the holiday, and there was this, I'll read it to you, I have to find it, this tiny little, it's like 3 sentences that really moved me very, very much. Okay. It was, I took a little picture of it. It was in the prayer book. It says, I'm grateful for this. Shit. A moment of truth, grateful to stand before you in judgment. You know me as a liar, and I'm flooded with relief to have my darkest self exposed at last. And then it goes on, and it ends with, on this day, okay, I'll just read it. Every day I break my vows to be a dutiful child, a selfless parent, a caring friend, a responsible citizen of the world. No one sees, no one knows how often I take the easy way. I let myself off the hook, give myself the benefit of the doubt every day, every day. On this day, this one day, I stand before you naked, without disguise, without embellishment, naked, shivering, and ridiculous, and I implore you, let me try again. It's a very beautiful passage, and it could almost have been the little epigraph at the beginning of this book. These events that are the crises are horrible, but there's a huge relief, I think, that the characters feel because they're allowed to finally be who they are, and there's the only hope for change or for living a better life is to be fully exposed. Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's something that I see when I look at the book. I don't know that I intended it. The poet W.H. Auden said, "I look at what I write so that I can see what I think," and that's just been my experience. I don't have some set of ideas that I then write down or try to encode for a reader to decode. Some writers do that. I don't know what I enter with. I just enter very open to what will come. But that idea of these paradoxes that have to be sustained is running throughout the book. A friend of mine once said to me, a very wise person, said the only people who are really worth trusting and really worth investing yourself in are people who can hold extreme paradoxes in their mind without great discomfort. And there are some stories in life, like the Abraham story, where it's just a paradox. There's no way to reconcile it, and yet it can be a kind of sustaining story. There's a reason that's part of why we still tell it today.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think each character has a way to be elsewhere,
Yeah.
to not be where their body is. Each character has a bunch of different ways, actually. Somebody asked me the other day, why did you have to go on for so many pages about masturbation? But I did because it was funny, because it was fun, but also for a serious reason, which is it's an expression of Sam's pain, or the ways that he is elsewhere, and other life is elsewhere. Jacob's texting makes him elsewhere. His TV show makes him elsewhere, the secret TV show. Julia creating the blueprints for houses she'll never live in makes her elsewhere. And it's the antithesis of the here I am, the full presence. Yeah, absolutely. You mean sexual desire?
Yeah, sexual desire or desire of another life.
Yeah, and primitive desire, something that is deeper than the stories we tell about ourselves, and deeper than the kind of bourgeois domestic details of life, and deeper than what is polite, and deeper than what you think is proper to share. Jacob has hemorrhoids and takes this medicine every night in the bathroom, and it has to be a secret. And on the one hand, it's kind of funny. On the other hand, okay, you understand why he would do that. But it's so sad, actually. It's just so tragic. It's just a human body, and this is his partner for life, and it's his only life. And that anything about his body, but especially something that would cause any suffering of any kind, has to be compounded by the suffering of shame, is so sad. And it's, I think, a good expression or example or symbol of what their problem is, which is they've gotten so close on the level of, living life, but so far apart on the level of desire and bodily needs.
Or not.
Yeah. I would. The funny thing is, I don't know that I was thinking about it at the time. Even though the expression in book or out of book, it seems so obvious that it would be a metaphor for a book. I was thinking about it as a metaphor for a relationship.
Yeah.
But yeah, the language is too perfect to pass up. Have you ever seen the movie Stories We Tell, by the way?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful movie.
Yeah.
It's really, I just watched it again the other day. Well, there's another paradox in rituals, in the sense that they apply limitations to life. Any kind of structure is a limitation, and but they're limitations that are liberating. There's an old Borges story about two kings, I hope I get this right, who have a kind of contest for who can design a labyrinth that is more difficult to escape. And one of them creates an incredibly intricate labyrinth with forking paths and dead ends, and it's 10 miles by 10 miles. And it takes the other king a year to find his way out. And then the second king puts the first king in the middle of a desert, and he says, try to get out of this, because without having those constraints, there's no way out. We experience it in architecture all the time, the ways that enclosing a space makes a space feel big. So a lot of rituals, they're just a drag. They're not fun, and you don't want to do them. But the fulfillment of them does bring you closer to being the person that you want to be. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it quite like that. Also, the last word of the book is ready, right? It's funny, in my first book, Everything is Illuminated, there were a number of chapters called The Beginning of the World Often Comes, or The End of the World Often Comes. I hadn't thought about it, but obviously something in me is thinking about beginnings and endings.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's maybe one of those questions that's best answered with a book rather than with an answer. Yeah, when they explain why Isaac died, it's something like he survived and survived and survived until he couldn't, that the end of his life was the end of just the end of surviving.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's the same with relationships. Like when you stop beginning, you end. So what's necessary is it's the same thing with writing a book. Like you have to continually find new ways to feel that you're at the beginning, to begin again, and to recreate yourself. In bed and they're having that conversation, and right, it's nothing funny that's happening in that moment at all.
Yeah, of course.
No, it is the moment when you don't know if it's a beginning or an end, when either feels equally possible, which is a very, very rare moment in life, there are a lot of uses of humor in the book. Sometimes it's just silly. Sometimes it's just to be fun. Sometimes it's an expression of a kind of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's an expression of a feeling of safety or relief. And sometimes, like in that passage, it takes on a kind of religious quality of religious, not in the sense of organized religion and not in the sense of God, but in the sense of having a sudden appreciation of the scale of things, how small you are, how big you are, how precarious everything is. The kinds of feelings that are not domestic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.